I'm not trying to get you just single-handedly to solve the world's problems here, but I've been thinking a lot about this, and I have found myself frustrated by a couple of things. One, what you've described, I sometimes conceptualize as it feels like the right, the establishment, the center, whatever you want to call it, is just evolving at a rate that is outpacing the wins of the left and the kind of strategic innovations of the left. So when you have a moment where it felt like we were on the precipice in a Bernie 2016 moment, they learned from that. They learned from Trump's win and how Trump became the nominee in 2016 because the Republicans did not consolidate behind one alternative candidate. And he was able to win with basically 30% of the Republican vote, and said, we're not going to let Bernie do what Trump did. And we're going to get Obama to pick up the phone and make the calls and consolidate behind Joe Biden. And it feels like when we have these massive protest events like Black Lives Matter, the lesson that was learned in 2020 was that even in the face of the largest protest movement in American history, if you weaponize the idea that Donald Trump is going to win unless everybody sits down and shuts up and gets behind Joe Biden, then you can corral people back into place. And something similar seems to be happening here with Gaza, as you, I think, really astutely just pointed out, that the parallels between the Egypt scenario and what we're seeing now, where Kamala is a new face in an old regime, and people are very happy to go along with it. I think I and a lot of others have seen it this way, and have wanted there to be, at least among the left, and I understand that we're a minority, and I don't expect this to be, a sea change event, but to start to get more serious about investing early in alternative candidates. Whether it was getting behind somebody in a Democratic primary just to say that they can and to do me a dirty break or whatever possibilities that emerged, or to get behind a real third party like the Green Party, whether it was a time when Cornel West was the Green Party candidate or now that Jill Stein is the Green Party candidate, because there needs to be an effort to build a party that is not the Muslim Brotherhood that can occupy the void when the void finally reveals itself. So I do wonder if you think that is a worthwhile feat and something people should be focused on, because it does feel like a lot of people, including on the left, are incredibly dismissive of ever starting the project of trying to build up an alternative party, and have a kind of a doomerism about it that I find to be more demoralizing, frankly, than having certain kind of an argument with a certain kind of centrist.
Yeah, so, I mean, there are, in fact, three interesting candidates if we stay with this presidential cycle. And it's actually interesting to spend a few minutes on this.
Please.
If Cornel West had stayed with the Green Party, I mean, you run in the presidential election to build the structures of an alternative. You don't run in the presidential election to have the argument, because they're not going to let you into the argument. I mean, they were not going to allow Cornel into a debate between Biden and Bush. Biden and Trump. What an interesting threesome that would have been. Cornel there, brother Trump. Whatever. It could have been so interesting. But they're not going to let you in to have the argument. So you enter the presidential domain, the race, to build the structures. If Cornel had remained in the Green Party, it could have actually helped the Green Party advance its structure building exercise. I thought it was unfortunate that he, did what Cornel often does, which is sort of blow things up. I mean, I really wish he hadn't, because if he had stayed in the Green Party and been a disciplined candidate, if they had built an agenda, brought in a bunch of left people to support the candidacy, they could have actually helped build structures of the Green Party in parts of the United States where you won't have a chance of building, a base. Maybe you'll end up building a Green Party in Wyoming. I mean, maybe if Cornel had gone as a Green Party candidate to parts of the Midwest where you have slaughterhouses, you have lots of immigrant workers and so on, they may have built the infrastructure. It could have been unbelievable. He can do things that Jill Stein cannot do. And unfortunately, that didn't work out. So that's a real disappointment. Jill Stein enters into the race only to protect whatever Green Party structures exist now. She is not under the illusion that she will be able to build a whole new apparatus in places, where they didn't have a presence. She is there to hold the line. And I think You got to salute her for that. She came in the last minute to make sure the Green Party retains the structures that it has. Fine. Then you have Claudia de la Cruz running on the Party of Socialism and Liberation. They are, I think, in the ballot in about 24 states and so on. They are running effectively to build their political organization. They're not running to win the election. They understand that. They are out there campaigning, putting Gaza at the forefront, trying to build the Party of Socialism and Liberation. That's what they are doing. Now, that's in the middle of this, where we are. Harris versus Trump. You got 3 left candidates. One of them, I think, Cornell, unfortunately, the car is not moving, because if he had stayed in the green, it could have been quite interesting. And the PSL is building the PSL in this moment. My feeling is that if I was speaking to former Bernie enthusiasts, people who had been enthusiastic about Bernie, my feeling is that, you have to go back to the enthusiasm in the moment where Bernie put that charter of demands out. My feeling is that in various localities, people need to enter into serious political party building. The DSA is a really ramshackle project. Like with so many US-based political formations, there is no real centralized structure. Even Black Lives Matter, anybody could have used the Black Lives Matter, and unfortunately, people used the label to raise money and so on, turned out quite badly. There was no organizing committee, no recognized structure, no spokesperson, recognized or, given authority by the mass mobilizations and so on. You got to build those structures. You need a left political party, something like the PSL, maybe other groups and so on. They need to be there, but they are not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is there is a need to build structures of the American broad left that will galvanize, bring people into organization, create structures of accountability, make it clear to people like AOC and others that they actually shouldn't see themselves as leaders of a movement, but merely representatives of a mass of people. That's not just their constituency. AOC didn't just win in that one constituency in New York. She needs to understand she won because of the groundswell of waves of movements. Black Lives Matter, the Occupy movement, Bernie, this, that, and the other, because those national movements galvanized the section in her constituency to come out and vote for her. It's not her, this former bartender that, everybody was like, let's get AOC into Congress. They wanted somebody who represented these waves of protest, those opinions. And for that, you need a structure. You need, in a way, kind of structure for American mobilization, where the next wave that happens, there is the ability for people to build disciplined accountability structures to draw people in, but also create real democratic dialogue. What happens with the way politics works is the moment you get elected to Congress, you are superior to everybody else. It's very hard to have a public dialogue with a congressperson. They don't see you. They don't want to talk to you. I mean, I watch videos of coat pink people running down the halls of Congress trying to talk, and they just dismiss them. They tell them, I wish you would die. I mean, God, you're elected. You're not God, man. You're not like, you're just an elected official. Relax. You're just like me in a fancier suit. Relax. But no, this hierarchy is created, and I think this impacts even people of the left. I was very pleased to be in Detroit earlier this year for a conference on Palestine where Rashida Tlaib came and spoke. She spoke so much from the heart that I didn't believe she was a congresswoman.
Yeah, you mentioned CorI Bush as the most radical. I've always put Rashida Tlaib in that spot. I think this has come up on the podcast before, but there was this moment, I think, during Bernie 2020 where she, Pramila Jayapal, and somebody else were all on a stage. And I think Hillary Clinton came up and the crowd started booing. And Pramila Jayapal's like, no, 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 don't boo. And Rashida's like, no, please boo, boo her. Like, there's a kind of like authenticity about her and a kind of fearlessness that comes along with that. We all, of course, just saw her attending the Netanyahu address, which felt braver than missing it, boycotting it and sitting there alone, so completely alone, with her sign calling him out for being a genocidal maniac. And it's rare that you see that kind of demonstration of courage. And I do wish we had an opportunity for a leader like her on a national stage, although perhaps I should stop thinking so exclusively about national politics. But it's hard, It's hard when we're, less than 100 days out from a presidential election where there's been already kind of a revolutionary act in the incumbent being basically pushed out of seeking reelection by mass discontent. And by a debate performance that even the media that's been running cover for him for years couldn't or wouldn't excuse away. And it is frustrating, I have to confess, to see that kind of a revolutionary act from the Democratic Party establishment and to not see a willingness to break from kind of basic vote blue no matter who narratives from the left. And I'm not even like mad at your average sort of Bernie voter, in the Midwest or something, who's mad about NAFTA and, whatever. I'm talking about like online leftists, people with shows, the people who are like too online and overly engaged and who are journalists and politicos and stuff, who are the ones that I get the most visceral pushback from when I ask them about breaking meaningfully, not just rhetorically, but in terms of their votes from the two-party system, because there is this ever-present threat of, well, what about Trump? And I do want to ask you kind of pointedly, what do you make of that kind of harm reduction argument? And is there necessarily always going to be a trade-off and a need for a willingness for folks to basically take on that risk if they want anything to substantively change?
Please don't ask me that question, because that's the trick question of, let me hide from that question in this way. The last time this happened in the United States was when Nixon resigned, and then Gerald Ford took over and then was defeated, I think 18 months later, by Jimmy Carter in the election. This doesn't end well, right? And Ford had I think at least a year between Nixon's resignation and then the election where he lost to Carter. But when Ford went up against Carter, at that time, US politics was not so polarized. Carter, whatever. It was the next election when Carter went up against Reagan that politics started to get super polarized. The debate between Carter and Reagan was ruthless against Carter's liberalism. They started making fun of Carter wearing a sweater in the White House, the solar panels, it was a ruthless polarization that after Reagan becomes unbridgeable. Yeah. At that time, nobody said to Nixon, stick it out, Dick, because you can't afford to have Jimmy Carter win. The Republic it's at stake or whatever. Between Ford and Carter, now you might look back and you'll be surprised. In fact, Nixon seems more to the left of Biden on many issues having to do with social spending.
The EPA,
and,
sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So that example doesn't hold. I am uncomfortable with the argument that, if you don't do this, Trump will be back and Trump is worse. Look, Trump is horrible. I mean, horrible, like for God's sake. On the other hand, a sober assessment of the Trump presidency and the Biden presidency will reveal that there are lots of parallels. It's not like Trump was so off the deep end. The pressure campaign on China, Obama started that. Biden continued it. The putting Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list, Biden didn't remove Cuba from the state sponsor on terrorism list. The the deportations, look at Obama's record, then look at Trump, then look at Biden. I mean, it's a straight line, guys. It's not like a huge spike. Okay, maybe hate crimes go up, and that's significant for somebody who's being picked upon in school, told that you're not an American. We now have an American in the White House. Not a whatever. That's real for that kid. Abortion, those are real. But let's not exaggerate. Like, Trump isn't the reverse of US history. Trump is very much in line with US presidents since at least Reagan. I don't think this is like some monster coming back to the White House. I really don't think so. And the reason I said, please don't ask me this, is because I know whatever you say is a problem. But what I will say is I don't believe the Democratic scaremongering about Trump. I think Trump is horrible, but I don't think that the only reason to vote for somebody is that they're not Trump. That to me is an illogical argument, especially when the record of somebody like Trump is not qualitatively worse than the record of somebody like Biden. Qualitatively worse. I mean, whatever happens, what the Democrats should be saying is, whoever wins the presidency, we need to win more seats in Congress. Our congressional leadership needs to be more robust in its politics. It's not. I mean, when you had Trump in the White House, why didn't the Democratic Congress make life difficult for him? When there's a Democrat in the White House, particularly Obama and so on, the Republicans made hell in the Congress. Democrats are quite happy to, be reasonable. Mm-hmm. How is there pretense that Trump is worse? How does that square with their kind of capitulation to Trump when he was president? So I don't like this argument that the Democrats keep making. I think it's a false argument. I think people shouldn't be cowered into this. I believe that in the majority of US states where the election is a foregone conclusion for that state, people should not vote for these two parties. I think if you live in New York State and you have a conscience, if you go and vote for any of these parties, I think you're insane. I really think you've really lost the ability to think politically.
Yeah, I think that's very right, especially in these red and blue states. It is literally throwing your vote away to vote for the Democrats in states that are going to be red and are going to be blue, whereas investing your vote in something like the Green Party, helping them get to 5% of the vote, where they can get federal matching funds and use that to build the infrastructure that they need to actually be a real force in these kinds of elections and on state level races and local races as well, is a much better bang for your buck. And of course, I think Claudia de la Cruz is fantastic, and I support her as well. I just feel like at some point someone has to have a serious conversation about consolidation and what we can get out of it as a left community, and just for ballot access reasons, and Cornel West as well. I personally think he's fantastic, but just practically speaking, given our numbers, I think we should consolidate behind the candidate that has the most ability to have a longstanding infrastructure development from this. And to me, that is Jill Stein. And I will say it, and I say it on the show all the time. I think that Vote Blue, no matter who, is a toxic curse on the left. I feel in some way it has become my mission to try to figure out what combination of words I can say to try to get people to understand that they are in the middle of a collective action problem that can only be resolved if they relinquish the Democratic Party. And I walk people through various scenarios. I try to say to them, okay, well, if the Supreme Court is the be all end all and you're so terrified about what's going to happen, why didn't Joe Biden do anything about Supreme Court reform in the first years of his presidency when he had the House and the Senate? Why was he always against filibuster reform that would enable him to at least threaten to pack the court or to institute age limits or whatever other reforms were put forward at a conference on the subject, at a hearing on the subject that he had very early in his term, and which we covered here on this show? Why is it that you are basically willing to fight Trump harder than the Democratic Party, to your point, has ever been willing to fight against Trump? If Joe Biden is so well-meaning and the Democratic Party wants to do all of these things, how do you explain the machinations of Chuck Schumer stripping the $15 minimum wage out of the must-pass COVID relief bill and blaming it all on the parliamentarian who had absolutely no authority? I mean, how many examples can I give you of how the Democratic Party uses parliamentary procedure and this idea of rules and limitations that are outside of their control to come up with excuses for why they can't ever deliver for the people that they are supposed to represent? But when a Republican is in office, suddenly there's absolutely nothing that they can do to stop him. And he is, the devil incarnate, Hitler returned, and all these other kinds of things. I mean, I try to heighten the contradictions, and I know that some people are persuaded by it, but it is still, I think, we have a long way to go. we have a long way to go.
I mean, I don't want to keep going with you on this, but the reason I didn't want to answer the question is that I quite agree with you that, one has to find a way to talk people into the conversation, because that whole MAGA scaremongering, however much, one dislikes the politics, the tone, the this, the that scaremongering is really difficult to walk people out of, like if I say that, look, on the merits of it, the 2 points I made, one about the issues that, they pursued similar things. The other one is, why do the Democrats always sort of lie down and say, tickle my stomach? These are just not compelling to people because they come back and say, well, now Trump doesn't have fetters. This new Trump administration is going to be worse than the previous one. I remember Reagan was the worst. Then Bush was the worst president.
Yeah.
Trump is the worst. And between Bush was the worst and Trump is the worst, Obama said Reagan was a great president. What? There was a time when you guys said Reagan is a real threat to democracy. Come 20 years, 30 years, somebody's going to say, Trump was a great president. A liberal Democrat will say, Trump really did, stiffen the backbone of the United States, whatever. Horrible, horrible.
Yep, you can see it happening. You saw it a little bit after he got shot. There was this little moment where there was a rehabilitation of, we got to be respectful and he's courageous and da-da-da-da. I mean, to your point about them being the same too, I'm reminded, or are there being about them being not different enough, I should say. There was a clip on MSNBC that was clipped by Case Study in the last day or so, in which these financial analysts are discussing who might be the next Treasury Secretary. And they openly describe it as who's trying to buy the spot with political donations. And they bring up Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase as a potential candidate.
Treasury Secretary in a Harris administration. Who is it?
Who's closest to buying it?
Who's closest? Well, the people leading the charge on Wall Street, you have Ray McGuire, you have Blair Efron, you have
they're the major donors.
Yeah, and they're really putting themselves front and center. But who she chooses remains to be seen. Jamie Dimon's name is always floated.
Here's what I'm going to say.
Who do you think?
I'm going to say that I think that her first pick, if she had her own, up to her own volition, she actually would try to get Jamie Dimon to do it. Whether he'd do it or not, I think is a question. I think after that, she'd actually pick a Gina Raimondo kind of person, which I actually think, and I have I have a huge amount of respect for Gina Raimondo. I think a Ray McGuire, maybe a Commerce, something like that. I don't know where a Mark Lazary or a Blair Efron land in this,
political environment.
In that world.
I don't think Jamie Dimon will want it. I don't think he wants to
that's
answer to anybody.
Why wouldn't he want it?
I think that he doesn't want to answer to anybody.
Okay, so I disagree. I actually
think somebody could turn that job down? I feel like secretly everyone
I think he would.
I
think potentially this
it could be it.
Yeah, and the timing kind of works. The new building is going to be up on Park Avenue.
It's time for him to set,
there's been talk.
It's a legacy.
Yeah.
Sure.
And by the way, if you got a lot of stock and you want to put it into treasuries, is a great opportunity. Meaning, no, when you leave and you go to the White House, the tax benefit, at least in the immediate term, is quite remarkable. Okay, Lydia.
Public service.
Thank you for coming in on a summer Friday.
And I saw someone in the comments point out, well, also Donald Trump has floated Jamie Dimon as a potential Treasury Secretary. And that's the world that we live in. Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.